Dr. Duncan Robertson is from Loughborough University School of Business and Economics. First time I've spoken to him in 2021, but we've been talking to each other since March last year. Duncan, hi.
Hi, Ben. Hi.
Look, just first of all, there's lots to sort of unpack here. First of all, where are we with the figures of the virus?
Well, we're still in the stage where the number of cases are going up, and this new variant, which is much more transmissible, was initially in Kent and the southeast, but now we can see it going right across the country. So certainly the numbers of cases are going up, and hospitalizations are going up. And, sadly, we're starting to see deaths go up as well. So, it's a really critical time. And, essentially we need to do everything we can to do our own part to prevent it spreading even further.
Are there any signs at all, and it's probably too early to see, but are there any signs in those figures at all that the latter part of the tier system and the first part of the lockdown have started to put the brakes on at all?
Well, we're still trying to work that out. But I think the issue is that, we can't really compare the stringency of the lockdown, say, in November, because it's not as stringent. So I think we're still seeing the numbers go up, I would say, rather than go down. And of course, this is putting more pressure on the health service. So I think this is kind of why Chris Ritchie was saying this morning, just do what you can to prevent any unnecessary interaction with anyone outside your household. And that's the critical thing, yeah.
Look, we tend to think of April last year as a key point in the pandemic. We saw lots of peaks in that time. Where are we with that? I mean, have we gone past that? Are we getting close to it? Where are we?
Well, it was difficult to know exactly how many people had COVID in April because the sort of mass testing hadn't quite come out. But what we can see is the number of people in hospitals, and that's a much more reliable figure. And of course, what happens is when people go to hospital, they stay in hospital. They might stay in the wards or in intensive care. And the real problem is the number of people in hospitals at the moment, and that's about 50% higher than it was in the peak in April across the country and also in Leicester as well. So, really it's worse in terms of numbers of people in hospital. And of course, that's the real problem, is that once hospitals are full, and not just full to their surge capacity, then they can't do the other things. So, if you or I have a road traffic accident, for example, the quality of care may not be as good as it would be normally. So this is where the system gets overloaded, and of course you get other consequences and other deaths as a result of that.
I mean, I suppose it's worth making the point, as I understand it, I think the NHS is quite finely tuned, isn't it, to peak demands and so on. And because, to make an efficient service, you need it to be running at near capacity most of the time. Is that right? That's
absolutely right. And of course, we normally have, large occupancy of patients in hospitals at around this time. And that's the other comparison to the April peak, is there were very few people in the wards in April for other non-COVID conditions. But of course now there are more non-COVID patients. So you've got more non-COVID patients and significantly more COVID patients. So this is putting a sort of double pressure. And therefore, what tends to happen is if one hospital can't cope, you might send it to other neighbouring hospitals. But what we're starting to potentially see is whole regions, in the coming weeks, potentially be full up. And that really isn't good at all.
Well, the figures are confusing, aren't they? Because as you say, the numbers of people in hospital are enormous numbers of people. I was talking to a doctor actually across the weekend who said that the figure he'd like to see more often is how many people go into hospital are then coming out, because that's a key. I suppose in some senses that's a key plus point to this. That okay, going into hospital is bad enough, but more people are coming out having survived COVID.
Well, yes, absolutely. So, we have got better treatments, and I think, some new treatments were announced earlier last week, which can prevent deaths, and that's great. The problem is, of course, that the people who don't die are still in hospital, and that puts pressure on the number of people in hospitals as well. And that's why it's not just the number of people going into hospital, as you say, who's coming out of hospital, and the difference between those two is basically how full those hospitals get. and we're starting to see the numbers go up significantly.
And whereabouts? Because I know this is something that people have talked about for months now. Well, there's more testing, therefore, of course, we're going to see more cases. Talk us through that.
So yes. So what we're seeing is we're roughly at about 500,000 tests per. About around the 500,000 figure, and so even though the number of cases are going up, we're not seeing more people tested. And how does that kind of represent itself? So we're seeing the number of cases go up, but we're also seeing what's called positivity go up. So that's the proportion of people who test positive out of the number of people tested positive. And that's really showing that there is an increase in the incidence across the country, as well as the number of cases going up. So number of cases alone isn't sufficient. You can also look at these positivity numbers, and both of those are essentially going in the wrong direction.
So if we're hearing from the government that they want to have everybody, all adults, vaccinated by autumn this year, which seems a long way away, isn't it? At what point is vaccination going to start biting into the virus itself to slow it down?
So what we do really is this vaccination has transmission, and we hope that it will reduce transmission, but we're not entirely certain about that. So the one thing that the vaccine will do, what it's designed to do, the role it's designed to do, is to reduce the number of deaths. And that's why there is this priority list. And number one, the highest priority are people in care homes and the workers in care homes. And then it's NHS workers. And then we go down the list of ages with, clinically extremely vulnerable and clinically vulnerable people in there as well. So, what we're hoping to do is to reduce the number of deaths. And that's really why this, finding out how many people have been vaccinated and who has been vaccinated, how many people in care homes have been vaccinated. And those sort of figures I expect and hope that we'll get from government press conferences going ahead. But it's important to think about the number of people who have been vaccinated rather than the number of people who've been offered vaccinations.
And this is a difficult question. By all means, so I don't want to answer it. But do you? Lots of people talking about early spring, Easter as a relaxation of some of the stringent lockdown that we're talking about at the moment. Do you think that's realistic?
So it's I think from what the government is saying is they want the hospitals to have capacity before they release lockdowns. And so I think what we're seeing is we're going to get, a couple of months of this. So I wouldn't expect anything to change significantly before Easter. And then it's really how much the government how much society is prepared to have a number of people going into a hospital.
Duncan, as always, thanks ever so much for spending your time with us this Monday morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks.
Cheers. And you can see Duncan online as well if you want to go onto his Twitter feed and so on. Dr. Duncan Robertson from Loughborough University.